Hi, welcome to the 13th floor. I'm Marty Duda, and today we have John Davis and the Cicadas, or a cicada, as the case may be.
Yes.
Yes.
The cicadas vary in flock size depending on availability, financial considerations, etc.
And what is the name of your cicada today?
Rob Chamberlain from the excellent band Evil English is here with me, and he is playing percussion and also a mix of sort of keyboards and sample triggering through some electronic stuff. So he's very ambidextrous. I'm very lucky to have him here.
Cool. And my first question, well, the first thing I wonder is, since you live in beautiful North Carolina and it's summertime there, why have you decided to come to New Zealand in the wintertime?
Well, we're both from Massachusetts, and we both feel somewhat uncomfortable with the heat in North Carolina. But it's mostly that, you know, these days I work full time as a teacher and as a political organizer with the teachers union. And so, as far as traveling, especially abroad, I'm sort of limited to school breaks. And so, my mom used to say, I was a middle school teacher, the 3 reasons to go into teaching were June, July, and August. And so I went to Europe by myself for spring break for a week. But you know, it's not such a great time to. It's more fun to be a tourist in the summer, I guess. But like as a musician, people tend to be on summer vacation, so it's actually beneficial to go on tour in a country that's, in a way, it's sort of like an interesting opportunity, because I went to Europe 2 summers ago, ran around the U.S. and people are like, oh, you should really come in the fall. And I'm like, well, I'm busy teaching and you know, organizing. And so, you know, but also just respect for the, you know, the history here, which meant a lot to me coming up and formulating my ideas as a young musician, just the incredible music that's come out of here. I wanted to see the place.
So which music in particular influenced you?
Well, I mean, I guess there was sort of scenes always come in sort of generations and eras, but you know, the first in my high school, the Chills and the Clean and Verlaines, the Tall Dwarfs, the Bats, all that stuff was, you know, the Dunedin Double EP had all that stuff. It was really like if you went to the cool record stores in Cambridge, that stuff was really prominently displayed, and we were all really excited about it. And Harvard, the university where I was in town, their radio station pushed that stuff a lot. And so, and then later the you know, Expressways stuff like Dead Sea, This Kind of Punishment, Peter Jeffries, Sandra Bell, who I'm playing with, it's his first show, Alistair Galbraith. That stuff started getting issued more through labels like Drag City in the United States. Some of those folks came over to go on tour, and I met Alistair Galbraith, for example, and Peter came on a tour to the US, and I met Alistair in Cambridge. And so when I was trying to set this tour up, I just reached out to Alistair through social media. I was like, hey, you know, like, really enjoyed meeting you in the 90s. Maybe I'd like to play a show with you. And he actually, I just put out a new instrumental project that has a cover photograph of a moa bone that Alistair took. So I have this sort of new record that has this sort of New Zealand component to it from the cover art.
But this is your first time here, right?
This is my first time here, you know, and I wish I could have gotten here sooner, but better late than never.
The good thing is most of the bands you mentioned, a good portion of them are still around and playing.
Yeah, and I'm really lucky, like a lot of those people are going to be supporting us in some of these bills. So Sandra Bell I mentioned tonight, and Pumas is playing tonight, and Peter Jeffries is going to play with us in Palmerston North. Oh, great. And Cookie, the Brooklyn and the Crumbs, who are younger. It's weird to be like 48, so they're like people that I think are younger are actually not. They're thinking like they're already kind of past their, like, you know, prime. I'm not saying that about Cookie Brooklyn, but anyway, Cookie Brooklyn and the Crumbs, I really like their stuff that I've heard, and they're playing with us in Wellington. Bruce Russell's new group, I don't know how to pronounce it, Aotearoa. The Aotearoa Snuff Jazz Quartet, improvisatory stuff. Salad Boys are playing with us in Christchurch, and Alistair Galbraith and Jackson Harry are playing with us in Dunedin, so I'm going to see some great shows. Yeah, very cool. And there's an amazing film about the Chills that's come out. I heard, I've seen on Facebook and stuff that just came out, and I got to see them live several times in the U.S. And once was really funny. I saw them in Boston, and this guy in front of me was like totally not an indie rock type character. Right. It's kind of like when Nirvana would describe when they were getting big. Like he was like, well, I guess I don't mind if guys with mustaches, like macho dudes, are kind of the front row. So the dude like that was right in front of me, and he was like, and they started to play Pink Frost, and the guy was just like totally like, yeah, yeah. All right, he had like a beer, and all these guys around me were kind of indie rock scenesters in Boston were like, what's going on over here? And but Martin rolled with it very well, and it was a great show. And but one of my main pissed stories about New Zealand music was the Clean came, and the Tall Doors Christmas Knox was opening, and I was in high school, and I tried to get in with a fake ID because it was a 21 plus club, and I did not get in. And some of my friends' fake IDs were accepted. I didn't think that was very fair.
No,
so I did not get to see the Clean live ever.
I see. So yourself, I mean, you kind of took some time off after the Folk Implosion and did your teaching thing, and now you're kind of back into doing the music again.
It's weird kind of like being older and having been a musician, because a lot of things that feel very personal at the time seem somewhat impersonal to me, because there's so many musicians that have similar stories. Like, I was in this band, it was really intense for 8 years, and then we broke up right as we were starting to get more popular, and then I kind of like went away for a really long time, and I was burned out and disillusioned, depressed, and then I kind of like came out of that, and then I started to miss it, and I started gradually kind of, so. Yeah, I mean, I think like the stuff that I did with Lou and the Folk Implosion was more commercial than things I tend to do on my own. So I didn't, and also just there was, when we made our last record, you could really feel the record industry starting to die.
Right.
Almost like when we put out One Part Lullaby and we had signed to Interscope, and it was just this vibe. It was like all of a sudden, like when major labels would try to sign us, they'd just put us in these hotel rooms in New York sometimes, like when the Kids soundtrack came out, that were like 3 times as big as my friend's apartment. And they'd all come over and be like, I hope John keeps getting really successful, can hang out in big hotel rooms. And I'd just be really embarrassed. And then so all of a sudden, 3 years later, it was like we were meeting with Mercury in New York or something. And it was like the hotel room, it was like you'd had some neurological impairment. It was like, it was like this teeny little hotel with basically a bed. And Lou and I looked at each other and we're like, this is all kind of about to fall apart. And we'd go to these interviews, these music industry people, and they're like, so you got this job kind of because Nirvana got big and you kind of swept in and it's almost over, but you're still here. And so it was just there was just a vibe going on, and Britney Spears and the Backstreet Boys were all getting big. And it's sort of funny about just I find this in political organizing, which is what I spend actually more time on than music these days, is a lot of times when something seems to have failed, it kind of comes back later. And so, I'm pleased with this sort of way that a lot of the music that in the 90s, a lot of just because major label record people were like, oh, it's dead, it's over. And we were like, well, maybe to you, and maybe in terms of the longevity of it. And it's really nice for me, since I came back, to meet younger people that, were influenced by stuff that we did back then. And it's, I feel very lucky to get to do stuff like this on school vacations.
Yeah. Well, I get the feeling that the Folk Implosion thing wasn't necessarily done to be hugely popular. I mean, was that?
It was weird, because I think it was when we made the Kids sound. I think that we thought music is, I guess, this sort of former student you would call the dialectic of history. You're always reacting at something that came before. So lo-fi was Mudhoney and grunge had gotten really, really big, and all of a sudden it seemed like a formula that everything was really grungy, and people looked like this, and they had cardigan sweaters and stuff, and it was oh, step on that Big Muff pedal, and all of a sudden listening to Cambridge radio, I'm like, all this stuff sounds totally the same, and it loses its shock value and stuff. And so I remember Jandek or Daniel Johnston coming on Harvard radio, and it was terrifying because the volume wasn't there, and there was this voice was really exposed, and I just thought that seemed so intense, and then and then that became the new formula. Right. Everybody had a 4-track and was doing that, and everybody was, I think, kind of it. And Lou and I kind of got together, and we were already sort of starting to, now we have to react against that. So we started doing these songs, we touch me, touch me, touch me, baby, just to kind of shock people, who were oh, you. And remember, we'd start playing, Lou was you can't play a boogie riff like that. And I was like, this is indie rock, and I was like, oh yeah, watch me. So it's sort of so even before we did the Kids soundtrack, we were gesturing towards pop music, but limited by the 4-track. And so a lot of the appeal during the movie, because I don't really like that movie very much, and politically, racially, I think it's really problematic and stuff. And so in some ways I was oh, I don't know if I feel I really want to be this associated with this movie coming out. I mean, it does what it does very well. I just think its aims are somewhat suspect in a lot of ways. But sort of we were like, oh, we get to go to a studio and do all this studio stuff, but we don't have to sign a major label and be committed to it. So that was really exciting to us, and we were really intentionally trying to make things that sounded really big. And when we did Natural One in the studio, we actually thought, holy shit, this could be a hit. And then the record came out, and then like the record, like Harmony Korine from the movie is like, we're gonna do a single for Daddy Never Understood It. It's gonna be a minute long. And we were like, are you high? And he probably was, but you know, like, but it was sort of like, I was just like, why? And then they did a video for Casper the Ghost, and we were like, Natural One, come on guys, it's a hit single, put it out. And then they put it out, and then lo and behold, it was really weird because like a lot of it was like this disembodied experience where we went out to dinner with the people from London. They were like, so you know they're playing your record next to Janet Jackson in New York on the radio. And I was like, what? But so theoretically we thought it could happen, but then when it did happen, I think that, you know, it was a difficult position because Lou was in this other band and on tour a lot, and it sort of threatened to upend this balance of different things that we were doing. And I had this really great day job to be a musician where I could like work half-time in a library and get full health insurance, which in the US is a big deal.
Yeah, that's true.
And so I was like, in a way, I was happy to do music full-time, but I wasn't so happy to like lose my health insurance, you know, like, and so I kind of, so it was tough. And then I also think like, you know, it seems very quaint and strange now, but I think like at that time, you know, you had like bands like Massive Attack and Portishead and stuff. It seemed like this new next big thing might be these like post-punk influenced people like incorporating elements from hip-hop. So it seemed like possibly we might actually get really big the way Nirvana did, which now seems like a joke to me. I'm just like, that was a Haley's Comet experience. But a lot of indie bands my age, like Pavement and stuff, were shying away at that time from crossing over because they didn't want to die. You know, like Kurt Cobain did, or like Elliott Smith. You know, so it was a weird time, and I feel like in some ways I wish we could have been less uptight about the whole thing. And creatively, I think we didn't have any qualms about doing what we did that was getting more popular. But I think there was a lot of scene politics, and you know, like I remember there were some radio festival shows we'd pay that would have like 10 or 15,000 people at them, and we'd just look out in the audience, and there'd be like maybe 5 people who looked like someone we would know in the audience, and they would look really pissed off, like, you made me come to this river festival, and like there's no one here I want to talk to, and they almost look like resentful, and I just like, I'm sorry, you know. So it's like there's this weird thing of like indie rock bands, like some of the major label executives say like, oh, they won't sell 1 million records to 30,000 people. They only want to like have a relationship to this small core audience, but they're like, yeah, I can be big. And then people start coming up, like the guy at the Chill show, and they're like, oh, I don't want to deal with this, you know. And it's like, well, there aren't 1 million people like you in the world, you know? So you know, it was a very complicated time, and I do feel good that I don't think there are any records that we made that came out of that experience that you know, there's so many indie bands that sign a major label and make a record and then it's not very good, and I do think that there wasn't a Folk Implosion record that I couldn't stand behind. So.
Cool. Now we're going to hear some, let's go to a song that you've done today. This is what, Jeep Cherokee,
Jeep Cherokee. So while I was in the Folk Implosion, I was making solo records, and I'd sort of started out in this lo-fi label Shrimper that did the Mountain Goats and Refrigerator, and so that was one of my peer groups, and that was all related to the Expressway Records New Zealand stuff. And so I tried to keep that going while I was in the band. It was kind of hard, and so like these 2 songs we played today are both from a 1997 record called Blue Mountains that I made like while Natural One was on the radio and stuff. I was out, like when Sebado was on tour, I would work on my own stuff, and I made it in California in a small studio behind a feed store, which was really funny. It's like, but this song's called Jeep Cherokee, and it's the first song off a 1997 record called Blue Mountains.
Here we go.
1, 2, 3, 4. Dizzy and nervous, funny and floozy. A mind in the corner, throbbing with love. We've placed fresh trails on the fountain. Bang on the gates until they fly open. Jeep Cherokee, she's a wannabe. She's got the wheels, she's driving. Jeep Cherokee, well, she's a wannabe. She's got the wheel, she's driving. He's got the wheel, he's driving. She's got the wheel, he's driving. She's got the wheel, she's driving. The ashtrays. We'll drink from the fountain, bang on all the gates until they fly open. Jeep Cherokee, she's a wannabe. She's got the wheel, she's driving. Jeep Cherokee, well, she's a wannabe. She's got the wheel, she's driving. She's got the wheel, he's driving. He's got the wheel, he's driving. She's got the wheel, he's driving.
All right, we're back here with John Davis and the Cicadas, or the Cicada, as the case may be, and we're welcoming him to New Zealand for the first time. We just heard the song Jeep Cherokee, which dates back to the late 90s. Mm-hmm. And so you mentioned like activism and stuff that you're involved in now. What exactly are you doing as far as that
Well,
goes?
actually, one thing I'm really interested in coming to New Zealand is hearing more about the teacher strike, because there's a wave of teacher strikes that have gone on in the United States. And I'm from Massachusetts, which is, relatively speaking, for the United States, a pretty liberal state, and teachers tend to be treated fairly well there in terms of the salary part, not so much in terms of the curriculum. But so then I moved to North Carolina, which was sort of the South and the big bet. It's like a Republican state, and the teachers, make much less money there, and they're treated much, don't have collective bargaining and stuff. So I got involved with. We're trying to build a teachers union in a situation where it's actually illegal to be a public sector workers union in North Carolina. So I'm actually the treasurer of the Durham Association of Educators, and when I took over, I was contacting the IRS, and I was like, they were like, well, why are you a 501c6, which is like a business association? And I was like, I don't know, that must be a mistake. And then I called up the business manager of the state teachers union. He's like, that's because it's illegal to be a public sector's worker in North Carolina. I was like, what? So so it's like we're in this situation where we're treated really badly, but on the other hand, those of us involved with the teachers union think it's like a really exciting historically pressure point to be at, because we're trying to use it as a vehicle to spread left organizing throughout a red state and flip it, because the teachers union is a structure that's already present in every county in North Carolina. And North Carolina historically can flip either way, but because of gerrymandering and the way they organize electoral districts, and we need to break into some of these quote unquote red counties. And so the teachers union is already present in all these places that it's hard to build progressive organizations in. So I got involved with that, and I think also just being a public school educator at a Title I school, which is a euphemism in the United States for schools that have a lot of poverty, and working with families that may have folks coming from other countries, may be affected by things like structural racism, and there's a lot of violence in the United States with gun violence and stuff like that, has made me much. I was really interested in left politics before, but now it feels more rooted in relationships I have every day with teachers I organize with and families I work with as a teacher. So we played these two songs, they were a little easier to set up today, but I made a record called El Popo in 2017 that came out that's directly the first time I made a thematically political record, and a lot of it's so some of the songs, like El Popo, the song in particular, is about the United States involvement in Central America. And so people say it's a record about foreign countries, but to me it's a record about America, because America is an empire and it's everywhere in the world, and it's pretty much the same scenario everywhere in the world. And one reason I liked New Zealand music back in those days was that Expressways was putting out records like Killing Capitalism with Kindness and Use It Kills, which I took to be a commentary, or they had a record, the Dead Sea had a record called The White House, and so it seems like there is an awareness among some of the musicians here about how America functions as an empire. And there's a song called We'll Teach Them How to Privatize on the new record that we're not doing on this tour that the lyric is about a character who works on an aircraft carrier for the United States Navy, and there's this line like, the oceans are our shopping aisles, so we send these ships everywhere to get like, and I teach my students about that because I've taught, like I had kids in my class, I had one kid from Congo, and we were just talking a little bit about U.S. relationship to it, and her last name was Lumumba, which is the same as Patrice Lumumba, who was assassinated by the United States in Belgium when he tried to keep resources more after independence for that country. And so I do believe in being honest it's kind of a weird position being like a white school teacher with, there's some of the discourse around teaching I think is really backwards, which is that they're these sort of deficient people of color who need to be like brought up to this elevated standard of white mainstream culture. And right. I don't really want to put that message across, but it's sort of out of my control because of the teaching. So it's important for me to be accountable and say like, I'm here as a sort of representative of this culture that did all these things to actually push a lot of your families to come here.
Right.
And they might and it's been really interesting for me to meet students whose parents came from Guatemala, and a lot of times I was like, well, maybe this will be over their head, but a lot of times when I give them curriculum about, like we did some curriculum last year about Guatemala and about the overthrow of the Arbenz government, and which was by the CIA, and I was just talking about how that ever since Guatemala it's been sort of destabilized, and we were talking about remittances and how people come here and they send money back, and showed them pictures of houses people were building in Guatemala and hoping that it'll calm down enough there they can go back and live there. And two of the kids in my class were like, yeah, we're doing that. Our parents are building these houses in Guatemala with the money we save back and we send home, and we can't wait to go back there. And I think there's this discourse about immigrants to the US that's like, anyone would obviously want to be an American because being an American is superior to being in Guatemala. And so we're going to help you advocate for you by making so you can stay here. And there's this book I really love called The Right to Stay Home by David Bacon, which is about changing US foreign and trade policy to stop forcing people to leave Mexico because where you live, the water is contaminated by a Smithfield Foods hog plant, or like, you can't make a living as a farmer anymore. And so like a lot of those things that, but a lot of the just kids I've met are really amazing people, and they're really smart, and I just feel really lucky to get to be a middle-aged person who's learning new things and growing and changing. And I think that in some ways people are like, how do you keep doing music while you're teaching? And I think that doing things in politics and education is feeding my music and makes me, it protects me in a way from the narcissism and vulnerability in being a musician, where like, first of all, if you're my age, you're usually kind of, downhill. And so like, if you're doing it full time, that's kind of in your face more.
Right.
But I'm not really thinking about how many people like my Facebook page on a daily basis. Like I'm thinking about, how are we going to organize like a strike in North Carolina, or how are we going to change this policy? How are we going to get SROs, which are basically cops that are in schools? How are we going to get SROs out of schools so kids don't get arrested in high schools and start to get, and so like then I, like something like, oh, only like, like X number of people, like, who reviewed, it just seems sort of ridiculous, and I'm sort of like, but if that's your living, you have to really care about that. So I'm sort of protected from being pulled into that tide of like, your ego, and like either I'm like doing what it's always like this sine wave when I was in the Folk Implosion of like ego up, ego down, ego up, and no matter like how big you are, it just feels that way because that's what it feels like to live inside your ego. So I remember like we were talking to some record company person about the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones, and they were like who were really like multi-platinum band at that time, and it, actually like the first baseman on my Little League team was the guitarist in the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones. And I met him around that time, and we talked about how weird it was that we both had songs that had been on like World Series games and stuff like that. Because the night before I'd heard like, what's that song? Never had to knock on wood. I'd heard it like on a Yankees World Series game. And so we were just joking about that. But they were saying the singer for the band was like, the A&R person, yeah, I sit backstage with him, and he goes like, I'm Elvis. I'm shit. I'm Elvis. I'm shit. And that's just kind of like, if you're living through your ego, it's almost like a gravity thing of like when you get on these ego highs, you're gonna like hit the ground. And I think it was weird to kind of be in that position, however briefly, and see like it's never enough.
Yeah.
Like no matter how many people like, and it's, you know, it's interesting. This is a very rare thing for me to be talking to you like this, and someone's filming this, and it sort of reminds me of those days.
Right,
we
yeah.
would do that like all the time. You'd go to England and like do interviews for 9 hours, and it's a very like, it's a very odd position to be in, and so I do really feel like there's, but I do want to come out and sort of promote what I'm doing to a certain degree, because I think that one thing I feel really, someone who really inspired me to come back to making records is Scott Walker.
Right.
Because he'd been so popular when he was young, and then he really dedicated himself to getting weirder when he was older.
I have the Drift on vinyl.
Oh God, such a great record. Like, so Drift and Tilt and Night of the Hunter, and then Bish Bosch recording me with Sunno. I just think all those records are great. And he, you know, he really kind of renounced a lot of popularity he had in order to grow and be more creatively ambitious. So that's, to the extent I'm going to be doing music for the rest of to my life, that's my main goal. And so because I do think the records that I've been able to do with musicians like Rob and others and Scott Salter, I feel proud of them, and so I feel responsible to try and push them out there when I can get time off school to come out.
Excellent. Well, I'm glad you decided to come down here in the wintertime.
Thanks for the invite.
How many dates are you doing in New Zealand?
We are doing 11 dates in New Zealand.
So everybody should be able to see you.
You can check out Under the Radar, or my website is johnhdavis.com. And that has the web dates up there, and also you can hear the recent releases we've done, including, and there's one old record on my Bandcamp page, which is Blue Mountains we did from today. There's 4 records on my Bandcamp page, which is jdsoundbite@bandcamp.com.
Fantastic. And the song we're going to hear?
The song we're going to hear is called Knockout.
Knockout. Fantastic. Thank you very much for you guys.
Thanks,
Good luck
Marty.
on your tour.
You knock me out because you are a knockout, and I thank you for it. Thank you. They sent you downhill. You were spinning. Did you think you could control it? Spinning? I don't think so. Take a look right now. Our fists were flying in formation. Well, now it's over. Yeah, now it's over. They sent you downhill. You're spinning. Did you think you could control it? Spinning? I don't think so. Take